Hello and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Still in the hotel room. We will be back in the studio on Tuesday. I tried to film enough content to leave for 3.5, almost 4 weeks, and we ended up staying even a little longer than that. Jason is the superintendent for a large construction company, and they are remodeling a Walmart here in Northern California. I came on the road with him for a few weeks that turned into more weeks than I thought it would be. But you know, I'm bringing you your content no matter what. So here we are in the hotel room. I've learned to distrust quiet in a case. The hush that follows a storm is often where the truth hides. And in the winter of 2021, a young woman named Sandra Birchmore disappeared in one of those hushes after the storm. She had a new job, new classes, new apartment, and she was 10 weeks pregnant. The people who loved Sandra kept calling her. She didn't answer the phone, and the days began to stack up. Then on a Thursday morning, 2 police officers from Canton used a key to step into Sandra's apartment. They got inside and her cats were prowling around. They found Sandra seated on the floor. Her back was against the closet and there was a tight strap around her neck. Her skin was blue and her cell phone was resting about 12 inches from her hand. The last time it had been opened was Monday night at 9:13 p.m. That small detail would become very important later on. Sandra's death was ruled a suicide. As her family and friends began to hear about this, they were, of course, shocked, but then they got angry. They knew Sandra wasn't suicidal. There were doubt from friends, doubt from family, and that doubt would eventually lead them to a cop. Today's story has an explosive update. When this bombshell was dropped in the media, some people thought it was going to change the course of the case, but it isn't really going to do that, and we're going to talk about why. It was still a bombshell, don't get me wrong, and there are still a lot of questions surrounding it. This is the story of the murder of Sandra Birchmore. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin. As you drive south from Boston, the city thins into Norfolk County. Millbrick and pines and old railroad tracks, lots of Dunkin' Donuts. And Stoughton sits about 17 miles from the city. There's about 30,000 people that live in Stoughton, and it is a football town. Everybody goes to the Friday night football games. Canton, 15 miles from downtown Boston, rests at the foot of the Blue Hills. A little wealthier, a little older. It's headquarters to big brands and a surprising number of old stories. The Neponset River braids between them, a low gray ribbon in the winter. And in Stoughton, Sandra Birchmore was well known at the police department. As a kid, she was taking care of her sick mother, Denise, and there was more than one time where she needed help. Sandra had a thing for police officers. She liked the uniform. And like a lot of kids that don't have a stable home life, she liked the stability of being around police officers. Sandra joined the Stoughton Police Explorers Program. I think we have something similar to that in St. George, where kids can go and sign up to ride around with a police officer. I think even teenagers can do it if they're thinking about a career in law enforcement. The Explorers Program was a junior academy run by a very charismatic cop, a place where teens drilled like recruits and they dreamed big about becoming police officers. Sandra Birchmore joined in 2010 when she was 13. There were 2 twins, Matthew and William Farwell, and they had come up through the Police Explorers Program as well. By 2012, the twins were instructors at the Explorers Program, and their mentor was a man named Robert Devine. Now, what nobody knew at the time, this would all come out later, there was all kinds of inappropriate behavior taking place through this Explorers Program. Facebook messages, late night get-togethers, a culture that treated a virgin girl as a prize. Lots and lots of inappropriate talk, lots of misogyny, lots of talk about sex, just a really bad environment all the way around. In 2024, Matthew Farwell, one of the twins, began sexually exploiting Sandra Birchmore even before she turned 16. By that time, he was an officer and the Explorers instructor. He used his position and his phone to kind of pull Sandra in, slowly at first and then all at once. He groomed her. He created a pattern of secrecy where they had these little inside jokes and inside conversations that she wasn't supposed to talk about with anyone else. And then she got to a point where she was doing things that she would be embarrassed about if others knew. In late 2020, Sandra was working as a teacher's aide at East Elementary in Sharon, telling anyone who'd listen about her plans, nursing courses, a bigger apartment when the baby came, a future that finally belonged to her. She had taken care of her mother for so many years that she had her whole life laid out the way she wanted it to go. She had big plans for herself. She really wanted to go into nursing or some sort of first responder position. And then she ended up pregnant as a teenager. Sandra told a few people that she trusted that the baby's father was now 35-year-old Matthew Farwell. Not only was he 35, he was married and he had kids. But it got worse. She started telling these same trusted people that she'd been having sex with Matthew since before she turned 15. So in December of 2024, she tells Matthew Farwell that she's pregnant. He was furious and accused her of trapping him. As the pregnancy progressed, they would get into physical fights. One time, Matthew put her in a headlock. Another time, he snatched her phone out of her hand and threw it. A friend of Sandra's finally had enough, and she called the police. She said the quiet part out loud. Your detective and instructor at the Explorers Program is having sex with a student and has been since she was 15. Then one day, all of a sudden, Matthew's attitude changed. He got really sweet with Sandra and he told her that he wanted a key to her apartment. This was in February of 2021. Well, this apartment that Sandra was living in at the time had surveillance cameras. And on February 1st, the surveillance cameras captured the image of a tall man in a ball cap walking into Sandra Birchmore's apartment. He was not there for very long. And when he came out, Sandra was dead. 4 months after Sandra's body was found and the autopsy had been performed, the state had basically decided that this was a suicide. People in Sandra's life objected, but the coroner was not changing his mind. For the people that knew Sandra, this was just ridiculous. She was excited about being pregnant. She was excited about having her own apartment. She was looking forward to the birth of the baby. They had read texts. They had conversations with her. They knew she was not suicidal. So the family retained its own forensic pathologist. Dr. Michael Baden was brought in and he reviewed the evidence and concluded that Sandra's death was a homicide by strangulation, citing a fractured neck bone that's rare in suicidal hangings. Then federal authorities got involved. They opened their own case. So far, it had only been the state that was involved. The family screamed loud enough and long enough to get the attention of the feds. Once federal investigators were involved, they quickly realized there had been some misappropriation of power. That's about as nicely as I can say it. They brought Matthew Farwell in and charged him. Matthew Farwell was charged with killing a witness or victim to prevent the communication of federal crimes. Now there were new allegations. This cop groomed a teenager, and when her pregnancy threatened his life as he knew it, he staged a murder as a suicide. He knew about the camera in the lobby, so he put the cap on and tried to disguise himself. He turned Sandra's phone off. He staged her room, and slowly this whole story began to unravel. In their filings, the prosecutor began to lay out their case. Matthew Farwell had motive and method. He'd asked Sandra to delete incriminating messages showing sex before 16. He'd researched deleting his own data. Prosecutors argued that Farwell was a danger to the community and a flight risk. Prosecutors even said that the murder itself was an act of obstruction. He was killing Sandra to keep her from revealing her secrets. They even got him on wire fraud because he was paid for time that he was supposed to be at work when he was actually having sex with Sandra. Now, I don't diagnose. I read patterns. I am not anti-law enforcement. I'm pro-law enforcement. But again, I read patterns. The closer you look at Matthew Farwell and others like him, the more you see patterns. He's a homegrown cop who entered law enforcement through a youth program where he was later given extraordinary power and became an instructor. He and his twin were both described as proteges. They were like understudies to this powerful mentor. And Matthew Farwell seems to me to be one of those people that learned early in life that a badge can open certain doors and keep other doors closed. He knows who salutes and who doesn't. And that's a powerful cocktail for entitlement. From there on out, Farwell's behavior tracks like an abuser's playbook. Isolation, secrecy, gradual escalation, and digital control. His messages become directives. Delete this. Send this. save this. And then we have this young girl whose admiration gets weaponized into compliance. Years later, after all this abuse, when adult Sandra gets pregnant, she has a little bit of leverage. And then you get the classic whiplash effect with an abuser. Abusers don't like it when their victims get leverage. And then we have to throw in the institutional deference to this case. He very quickly ruled this a suicide without looking into anything else. Sandra had told people that this guy was the father. People knew that an older married cop with children was the father to this young adult's baby. This guy definitely had motive, but they didn't look into him at all. And the allegations against Matthew Farwell are that on February 1st, 2021, he strangled Sandra to death to stop her from communicating his crimes to law enforcement. His penalty could have been life in prison. There's video of him going into Sandra's apartment that night. The phone forensics proved that her phone was shut off for the last time at 9:13 p.m., which coincides with the video. And then they have all these text messages where this guy is grooming her for years, since she's a teenager. Then they had officers go through Matthew Farwell's phone and found out that he'd wiped his phone. I really can't believe people still think you can do that. Whatever you do, it leaves a footprint. Deleting leaves a footprint. So as the court case proceeds from 2021, 2022, 2023, just 2 months ago, we get this huge revelation. In June of 2025, it is revealed that DNA testing proves Matthew Farwell was not the father of Sandra Birchmore's child. This was like an earthquake to observers of this case. People thought, well, is he going to get off? Is he going to get away? Of course not. The government's obstruction and murder case does not rise and fall on the DNA of the child. It rises and falls on Matthew Farwell's belief. He believed that that child was his, and he killed Sandra to stop her from speaking about their relationship. So now we got to talk about the two other officers, because this gets worse, because of course it does. We've got Joshua Heel and Chief David Del Papa. Joshua Heel first met Sandra in 2019. He was working as an animal control officer, and Sandra went into the animal shelter to adopt a cat. The two became friends, and Joshua Heel claims they had sex one time when Sandra was an adult. Well, later on, Sandra's family would file a wrongful death lawsuit and name Joshua Heel in that lawsuit, stating he had knowledge of her grooming and inappropriate sexual relationship with Matthew Farwell. Now, some of those claims got dismissed in 2024, and Heel ends up undergoing not one, but 2 internal investigations with the city. He first denies ever having any sexual contact with Sandra Birchmore. And then later on, he says that he did, but it was consensual and it was only one time. Investigators determined he was not truthful or forthcoming. And in his second interview, he finally fesses up and says, yes, I know that Sandra was having a relationship with Farwell, but that he didn't believe everything Sandra said because she had a reputation for being untruthful. After this comes out, Heel ends up resigning. Now we've got Police Chief David Del Papa. He became the Abington Police Chief in August of 2021. He finds out weeks into his term that Joshua Heel knows about Matthew Farwell having sex with Sandra Birchmore. There are allegations that David Del Papa helped cover this up. By the time Heel was being investigated for the second time, Del Papa put him on leave. So what this says to me is this was a police department full of problems. It was full of problematic people who allowed inappropriate behavior to take place. That means we got to talk about it. If there is anything we need more of right now, it is transparency in leadership. Now, as always, the victim story is the most important, so let's talk for a moment about Sandra. Sandra was born in 1997. She was raised by a chronically ill single mother who loved her fiercely but needed her constantly. Sandra was the kid who remembered the meds, who learned to be the adult in the room, who found a blue uniform and an authoritative male figure enticing. This is a girl who had a lot on her plate. She didn't have a father. So of course, a father figure is going to be appealing to her. And the fact that someone would prey on her, knowing what her home life was like, it is infuriating to me, and it just makes me sick. Sandra went to this group inside the police for kids to have a place to be with other kids that got to live like a kid when she was living like an adult, to be around male authority figures because she didn't have a father. And what she got instead was a decade of grooming and abuse. Sandra got more and more comfortable with this story, and people even talk about the fact that she was oversharing a little bit at times. She used social media a lot. She put a lot out there. And I think that's common from people that want validation. They tend to overshare on social media, maybe share things that really shouldn't be shared. Personal things that are TMI, they're looking for validation online, and that's just not the place to find it. The Boston Globe picked up on this story and started doing a really in-depth investigation. It found a youth program with blurred lines, internal affairs violations off the charts, and a town full of predators disguised as authorities. In 2024, Stoughton's police chief issued a stark public statement acknowledging, quote, horrific injustices, naming grooming and sexual abuse, and promising institutional fixes. Policy memos don't resurrect the dead, and they don't quiet an angry town square. People gathered outside headquarters with signs that said justice for Sandra. There were whispers of more internal investigations, but people just found a blue wall.
I'm investigative reporter Ted Daniel. Former Stoughton police officer Matthew Farwell remains in federal custody, charged with killing Sandra Birchmore. State police initially ruled her death as suicide. 25 Investigates is looking back and at a different cop Birchmore knew named Joshua Heel. We have a recording that was never supposed to be made public.
And how she was failed by, manipulated by, and used by people of authority.
When Stoughton police revealed that 3 of their officers had troubling relationships with Sandra Birchmore, the name of an Abington cop also surfaced. Josh Heel previously worked for Stoughton's animal control.
The deputy told me that Heel and the deceased woman were friends and that they had texted quite frequently. I believe it was daily. There was a lot of digital information, he said, and he was hoping that Josh would help him connect the dots.
Can you guys just identify yourselves for the recording?
25 Investigates has obtained a recording of then Abington Police Chief David Del Papa in a formal interview with a town attorney. Del Papa says he was told in December 2021 that Josh Heel was a witness in Stoughton's probe. Here he describes getting new information 3 months later.
Birchmore was known to several members of the department as having mental health issues. Sandra had disclosed details about her relationships with other members of the department to Josh in explicit detail.
And according to Del Papa, Heel also had a sexual encounter with Birchmore.
The deputy chief had disclosed to me that he had received oral sex from a woman, and I basically told him that it happened off duty and extramarital affairs on any of my business.
And this is a guy who was working at schools at the time.
That's right. Josh Heel was an Abington school resource officer and police comfort dog handler. Kirk Minahan reported extensively on Birchmore and Heel in season 2 of his podcast called The Case.
It seems to me, minute 1, you find out, you put this guy on leave until you figure your stuff out. And if he's exonerated, fine, back to work. But of course, he wasn't exonerated.
Heel continued to work in the schools for another 6 months until the day after Del Papa learned that Heel's name had been mistakenly left unredacted in a report that was going to be shared with the media.
They wanted to give us a heads up because it was going to be a disaster. So I got off the phone. I called Josh in and told him, you're on admin leave. At that point, I still didn't know the full breadth of Stoughton's investigation as far as one of the officers having relations with this woman when she was underage and the grooming and all that.
We asked Abington Town Manager Scott Lambiase if Heel should have been taken out of the schools sooner, based on what Del Papa did know.
You know, as a police officer and a member of a union, civil service, there's steps that you have to go through before you can actually put somebody on administrative leave or begin an investigation. But I believe that once we actually knew the full depth and confirmation on what had actually happened, we acted pretty quickly.
Heel remained on paid leave until he resigned in early 2023. In a statement, Heel's attorney tells 25 Investigates Heel is a material witness and Mr. Heel has not now, has not been ever, and is not going to be the target of any criminal charges in the future because he has not broken any laws. Del Papa stepped down in May 2024 in what the town describes as a mutual separation. Abington hired an outside investigator that concluded Del Papa was professional and diligent in his handling of Heel. Del Papa tells us what happened to Birchmore is an absolute tragedy. He says, given the very limited information, my response was appropriate to what I knew at the time. Kirk Minahan sees it differently.
The buck was passed a lot of times. I think Del Papa should own up for his failures in this entire situation.
Days before Del Papa placed Heel on leave, he learned that Heel had texted, quote, graphic and filthy things with Birchmore while on duty. Del Papa also became aware that Heel created an unauthorized Instagram account named after his police comfort dog. Heel no longer works as a police officer. For 25 Investigates, I'm Ted Daniel.
Now, Matthew Farwell is in federal custody. He has pled not guilty. He is charged in U.S. District Court in Boston with killing a witness or victim, a count that carries a mandatory life sentence upon conviction and is death penalty eligible. As of now, August 2025, there is no trial date yet set. Now, of course, this recent DNA finding has obliterated this whole case. It complicates the narrative, but it doesn't change the fact that Matthew Farwell, if guilty, killed Sandra because he thought she was pregnant with his child. If he's guilty, he groomed a minor and had sex with a minor. We're going to have to wait to see what happens at trial. But I want to linger for just another moment with Sandra. She was the cousin who made belly laugh TikToks and wrote long messages like postcards from her day. She was a teacher's aide who beamed when a first grader finally read the sentence on the page. The student who believed in kids who needed someone to believe in them. She was only about 5 foot tall. She had a small frame, but a big voice. And sometimes that combo makes someone an easy target. Sometimes people mistake small for weak. Sandra wasn't weak. She was becoming. That's what grooming steals first, the becoming. No matter what happens at trial, it is clear that these youth programs need more safeguards. No child should sign up for a police explorer program and end up being groomed and impregnated, whether he did it or not, and of course murdered. I think about when this happened, February in New England. I think that's about the time of year that you start to feel like the ice will never thaw. I was thinking about the ice and the cold writing this story. Some people believe that they can murder someone and freeze all of the bad things that they've done, but ice thaws. And those stories bleed back into view. What happens in the dark usually comes out in the light. And I get some peace knowing that somewhere in apparently Rhode Island, Matthew Farwell is sitting in a cage waiting to find out if that's where he's going to spend the rest of his life. There are a lot of lessons we can learn from this story, but one of them for me is that I hope the next story like this is told faster. I hope the next victim feels more comfortable coming forward, and I hope the system is more inclined to believe them. For Sandra, that would be some form of justice. For the town, it would be mercy. And for the rest of us, it would be some sort of proof that silence doesn't get the last word, and that because you wear a badge, we expect more from you, not less. Thank you for joining me today on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. I sure appreciate you. This is my podcast. It's on Apple and Spotify. You can listen to brand new episodes every Monday and Wednesday. A special thank you to my patrons. I appreciate you so much. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.